Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our webinar today. What does fundraising excellence look like, with an emphasis on the CGP standards for gift planning success? My name is Jen Lennon. I'm a senior marketing and communication specialist for the Stelter Company, and I'm happy to be here to present or to introduce our presenters. Real quick before I do, I want to say just a couple words about our webinar series. So Stelter, as an expert advocate for asset-based giving, we are committed to providing you with innovative solutions and education. We pride ourselves on being a bridge builder for the nonprofit community. And as such, we're very happy to host this complimentary webinar today, as well as a whole slate of webinars that we've done throughout the year, which will connect you with experts from across the country to assist you in maximizing your revenue across your portfolio. So today's webinar is our 8th webinar. We have one more left that's in our regular schedule. That will be with Stacy Solman. She's the Chief Legal Officer and Vice President for Personalized Philanthropy for the American Committee for the Weizmann Institute of Science. That's a really long title. How do you like that? She will be with us 2 weeks from today, so November 16th, and she's going to be talking about how to use your data in your plan giving program. So watch your inbox. I'll probably be sending that to you tomorrow or Friday. Now back to the presentation today with Nathan and Eddie. So here we go. You're most likely all familiar with Nathan. He's been in the industry for over 20 years at the Stelter Company, where he's now the president. Stelter is an integrated marketing agency. If you don't know, I know a lot of you are our clients. Some of you aren't. So we have been in business for 60 years. We partner with over 1,300 nonprofits across the country on their plan giving marketing. And of course, Nathan is a sought after speaker. He has presented at more than 150 national and regional industry meetings and conferences. He's also a member of the National Association of Charitable Gift Planners Leadership Institute and chair-elect, which I was going to ask if that just turned over at the CGP conference.
Technically January 1st, but we're close.
Okay. So he's close. He's a chair-elect for the CGP's National Board of Directors, as well as the co-chair of the National Standards for Gift Planning Success Task Force. You guys probably saw him at CGP last week. He's also a 2-time graduate of the University of Iowa, where he earned a bachelor's degree in marketing and an executive MBA. He is joined today by Eddie Thompson, who of course you all know. He's the co-founder and CEO of Gift Clarity, and he's the founder and CEO for Thompson and Associates, where he provides leadership and direction to over 35 seasoned charitable estate planners. He has planned thousands of estates, which has generated billions, literally billions of dollars to charity throughout his 30 plus years working with nonprofits. And he also speaks to organizations from coast to coast. And he was actually just saying his tally since COVID started, he's done 500 presentations just in the last 2.5 years. So that is incredible. All about fundraising techniques, nonprofit management, and charitable estate planning. Eddie also serves as the chair of the Charitable Estate Planning Institute, which is a 501c3 public charity, which offers top-level education on charitable estate planning for development staff, gift planning officers, and professional advisors. And Eddie obtained his Doctor of Education in Higher Education Administration from Vanderbilt University, and his doctoral dissertation was on successful fundraising methods. So I think you guys are in really good hands today, and I am happy to pass it over to you, Eddie.
Well, thank you, Jen. Appreciate your help on putting this webinar together. And thank you, Nathan, for inviting me. I started my career. I really appreciated Jen saying I've been doing this 30 years. This is my 45th year. I'm starting in January. So yes, I'm old and I've been doing this a long time. I wrote my dissertation contrasting 13 of the most successful universities in the country to 13 average, trying to find out why the average were average and why the exceptional shops were exceptional. And I came up with this quote after finishing my dissertation: if we merely aim for industry standards, then our goal is mediocrity. Emulating the average not-for-profit, we are destined to live with all the problems the average not-for-profit faces. So we suggest you aim to be exceptional in your approach to fund development. The reason Nathan and I got together on this presentation is an earnest desire to help an industry we love achieve excellence. And so this has been our goal in the presentation. We know that to be successful in any endeavor, you have to have a systematic approach with high accountability. And all this begins with a strategic plan. So thank you for the introduction, Jen. Nathan, I'll pass it back to you.
Thanks, Eddie. And yeah, as Eddie mentioned, again, our goal, this kind of came to be. Eddie and I both serve on the national board. A lot of the stuff, and I'll thank the good folks at Hills Bank here in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. I'm in their basement. I just gave a talk to the Eastern Iowa Plan Giving group specifically around the standards and what we've been rolling out the last couple of years to be really foundational for whether it's a large organization, small organization, centralized, decentralized. It is critical and imperative for us as an industry and organizationally and even individually for success that we're adhering to the best practices we can. And so as Eddie and I were chatting around, our goals in this industry and some of the work that he and his team have done at Gift Clarity and around strategy and accountability, which is imperative for where we go, it really wove well with the standards. And so really our goal for today is I'll give you a high level overview of the standards. Again, we rolled these out in September 2020. It started as a metrics initiative, but kind of talk you through, how they're set up and why we did that. We'll turn it over to Eddie because they're a really critical part of the standards. And we're not going to touch on all 16 today, but we will weave in and out of quite a few of how critical it is to not be reactive and be more thoughtful and strategic as you put together your plan for success. And that includes, being able to have the realistic capacity and ability to execute. As your organizations evolve, as your own roles evolve, what does that look like? And then even share, Eddie will share some common mistakes he's seen as in his career. And again, based on even his dissertation around, where gaps may happen. So we'll kind of spend some time here. I'll jump into the standards and just give you a high level. Hopefully some of you have seen this. Again, we rolled this out in September of 2020, but the idea behind the national standards, it was really created based on some basic questions and situations that a lot of us have been through in our lives. And it's, have you ever wondered what's the difference between a good gift planning program and a great one? Have you ever asked, your boss, why aren't we investing or why could we be investing more? Or perhaps you've even inherited, this happened in the talk today, a fledgling program, and you're trying to rejuvenate that or jumpstart it. And so really the standards have been created by an amazing group of volunteers from all disciplines around the country. Of really what are the best practices? What are the things we see nationally that have application to all of us? And it's really intended, and I share this anytime we talk about the standards, to be a living and breathing guide. And we know as our best practices evolve, as technology and tools and all the things that go with that evolve, this is to evolve with it. And so, even those of you on the call today, as you hear and see and are utilizing or paying attention to standards, be candid with us, provide us feedback. Barbara Yeager at CGP is a great resource to reach out to. Where can we do better? Where are things you've seen in making the case? If you go to the next slide, Jen, this starts really kind of with some basic principles. And, again, we tend to look around at our colleagues within our individual councils, or even last week, we had the national conference in Reno, 800 gift planners all in one place. It was amazing to see so many folks. How do we, not get overwhelmed or maybe lack focus in trying to chase tactics? And, marketing, I love that side of this world, is very much a tactic. And how do we make sure we're being more thoughtful, strategic in regards to how we're building our programs? And it's possible even, as you look at some of the big organizations that you share time with at some of these conferences, small charities can do extremely well in deferred giving when they embrace kind of the standards and what this means to their organization. So next slide, as you look at really how the standards are built out, we were very purposeful around this GPS. We all love acronyms in this industry: CGA, CRUT, NACGP. NSGPS, our national standards, was very intentional around this. And it was really around these three themes that we saw consistent around successful programs. And part of that is growing. Every program is evolving. And this is when we think of our program evolving, sometimes we get stuck in what is external facing. Our legacy society is growing. Our number of donor conversations are growing. Our communication is growing, but it's equally important to remember internally. What is the communication with the stakeholders? And to some of what Eddie will touch on, how do we make sure it's set up from a strategic standpoint and it's not just, hey, this is a nice to do this year, because we know it's an important part of long-term fundraising success. Every program also needs to be pipeline focused. Plan giving is not just about the gifts identified today, but equally tomorrow. In fact, coming out of the national conference last week, it reminded me of an AFP conference years ago in San Diego, where a charity came up to me and asked, or made the statement really saying, I know I need to, and I've seen this at other organizations, make the investment in plan giving, but my board just says, why would we spend time there? The gifts are going to come in anyway. And actually on my screen here, I've got a sticker, and I have a couple stickers, but one of them is, what got you here won't get you there. And so it's really critical now more than ever, especially coming out of the last couple of years, for us to be thoughtful and in the way that we build our programs and the way we build our staff and the way that we educate and engage our donors. And then ultimately the S part of GPS is really around sustained. As opposed to, our colleagues in annual giving, direct response, major, where we see the benefits now, we know plan giving is a long-term focus. And it's critical that really, those conversations externally and internally are focused on that long-term vision and where we're going to be and how you as a donor can help us get there. And it's critical that we're not just putting our focus on the next 12 months and then saying, we'll get around to plan giving in a couple more years. It is really important to remember the donor journey and how do we complement that through our engagement. Next slide gets us really to the structure of the national standards. And as I mentioned, we're not going to dig into all 16. Happy to offline if anybody wants to reach out. I'm sure we'll share our contact information at the end here to show you where they're at on the website, and they're under and the assessments, which I think are really critical for not only individuals to take, to be candid with yourself on where you have gaps, where you have opportunities, but even organizationally or even as a council, utilizing those assessments. But it's really focused on how do we get support from the top. We all know, and thankfully Russell James and others have provided us some great ammunition and data points to help us continue to make that case. But as transitions happen, turnover happens, campaigns evolve, we're constantly having to make sure we have support from the top. It's also the reality of, while, your peer organization or your friend at this other charity is doing XYZ with their gift planning program, it's being realistic with yourself on what is, the ability and capacity you have to execute. And this goes to the strategic nature of how do we put together our plan. It may not make sense for you to try to be everything your peers are because you're not at that place. And then ultimately it's around the donor. We know, especially coming towards the end of the year here, we're looking at 2023, hard to believe, putting together SMART goals, putting together our key performance indicators. And it's very easy to get stuck in the tactics and, the measurables. But how do we make sure everything we do is around the donor and is around their journey and is around how we engage them and make them feel or hopefully understand that we're an extension of their values. So Jen, if you want to go to the next slide, this is just a snapshot. Not going to go through this, but wanted to kind of show you how those standards are broken down. This is available on the CGP website, and we'll definitely give you the link to that afterwards. And on the next slide, this really talks to the ones that we're going to talk around today. We're not going to specifically call out each standard for our discussion, but you'll see, the content and the importance of strategy, the importance of staffing, the importance of being thoughtful with your program, weave in and out of these different standards. And hopefully give you some practical ideas and application of what you should or could be doing with your program. And so before I hand it over to Eddie, really, touching base on this next slide here around strategy should drive everything you do. So often the focus, again, as I mentioned, can be tactical. I love marketing side of this. I love thinking through mailing lists and trying to identify, what are the motivators and how can we best connect with people and engage with them from a passion standpoint, but they're tactics. If you talk with any organization like ours or events firm or whatever, you'll find, so many options. But to know what is best for your organization, really you need a clear understanding of where's your program now? What does that look like today? What do you strive for in 12 months, in 24 months, in 36 months? Where are your program strengths and weaknesses? Have you spent the time, and I use it, and I'm sure Jen and others in the office are tired of it, it's the old slow down to speed up. We can very easily get stuck in the day-to-day activities because we all have more on our plates than we have time for. But taking a step back and really assessing where do we have opportunity to grow and where are we doing things really well? Who are our best prospects? What's the best way to effectively engage those? And are we staffed appropriately? What are our greatest opportunities and where can that strategy focus our time in areas for success? Again, time is a very real thing. We all are doing more with less. And how do we make sure from a focus standpoint and from a strategic standpoint, we're moving the needle forward? And that's why, the final part is, how do we measure success? The old adage is it's not worth doing if you're not measuring it. So how do we know what are the guideposts that we're giving ourselves today, tomorrow, next year to understand really where we're making headway as it relates to our program. So I wanted to give you just, again, a very high level. Hopefully many of you have seen some of the standards. There's a lot more to come organizationally, foundationally with the national CGP, but wanted to hand it over to Eddie to really kind of talk through the importance really around that strategy side of the world we live in.
Well, first of all, one of the things that struck me, Nathan, first time I saw the standards is that really these standards apply to fundraising in general, not just gift planning. And I would also recommend that to put together a strategic plan for gift planning by itself is not going to be as effective as you have an overall overreaching strategy for the whole organization. I've seen very, very few organizations in my 44 years that had a fundraising strategic plan. Now, I've seen where they had objectives or they had goals, but not a strategy. And as Nathan mentioned, often these are tactics, and tactics are a response to a strategy, a strategic plan that's gone wrong. You have an objective, which is a strategic plan. That strategy, a tactic comes in when you get to an obstacle and you have to go around. That's a tactic. And so often, instead of having a strategic plan, we have a plan that includes tactics, objectives, or goals. So the purpose of a strategic plan is to increase dollars raised to fulfill a mission. I got into fundraising because I believe it's important to help people. That's why we do this. People do not make gifts to build buildings. They make gifts to help people, and sometimes it requires a building. We keep our focus not just on the donor, but the individuals who are benefited as well. So the goal is to establish realistic priorities, things that can actually happen as we focus our efforts. The execution is getting it done the right way and on time. Nathan knows me well, and I believe in DBDs, done by dates. If we're going to take on an assignment, I want to know when it's going to be done. When I take on an assignment, I give people in my company a done by date. Success. Utilize your fundraising strategic plan to obtain lasting results. And I really appreciate what Nathan said. This is not something you do just for a year. If that's our only approach, we're in trouble. So be thoughtful. Require an honest evaluation of where you are today in order to plan for the future. A strategic plan, if well thought out, really considered, can change the destiny of your organization. That is not an overstatement. So when I look back at my dissertation, and then I spent about 8 years working for the Kellogg Foundation, me and 2 other individuals, somebody from Yale and someone UC Berkeley, we traveled the country visiting with not-for-profits, trying to help them improve their future success. And so often they did the same thing, the same way, every single year. And when they compared themselves to the most successful, they couldn't figure out why they were different. So the next slide, if you would, Jen. So you're going to have this presentation. You can go back and look at this, but I just want to highlight a little bit of this. Staff capacity. How many donors do your staff have time to really get out and visit? Do you have a large enough staff? Do you look at gift types, the type of gifts donors are giving? Do you have time for real conversations where you really can sit down and talk with people? It's difficult to raise a lot of money sitting behind a computer. You've got to get out and see folks. Do you have the right staff, the right size staff? We find that the average major gift officer, through our work with Gift Clarity, the average major gift officer spends 11% of their time with donors. That's average. The most successful shops, a major gift officer spends 70% of their time with donors. That's true of gift planning officers too. So we're not just people who have technical knowledge. We need to get out and see folks. But we also do some type of analysis with who are the most capable donors financially, but more important than that, who are high propensity donors, who are the people most likely to give, and have those donor conversation goals. What's the goal with each meeting? What's the intent? What's the purpose? What do you want to walk away with? And then do you have a strategic plan to plan for future growth where you're increasing your net dollars raised while adding staff? And do you have enough support staff? You know, the number one thing we see, Nathan, that's a huge mistake is that most fundraisers are wearing way too many hats. They have too many responsibilities. They don't have time to get out and see donors. And if you go back and look at why that's true, when you do an analysis, you find they don't have enough support staff. So you need to have weekly visit goals. And then should you calendar events? Absolutely. So the next slide, if you would. So what are the keys to success? So now, having looked at literally thousands of not-for-profits and doing analysis, and then I look at the most successful and compare the average or maybe below average to the most successful, 2 key ingredients to being successful: a systematic approach, a strategic plan, what needs to be done, who needs to do it, when should it be done. There's my favorite, done by dates. And you tie that very closely to high accountability. There's ongoing evaluation. And I would suggest the most successful fundraisers are not waiting for their leadership to show them what excellence looks like. They go achieve it themselves. So there's high accountability, not only from supervisors, but also you hold yourself accountable. What should be measured? Activity or results? And I am a firm believer, and many of you may not agree with this, I do not believe it's best to evaluate a fundraiser on how much money they raise. I want to know what are their activities. If you have the right activities, you're going to achieve success. So the next slide leads us into another concept. When we do our analysis, we found a number of things that I think are really striking that have increased the need for these standards. Number one, if you look at this left corner, the box to the left, this not-for-profit has 259 donors that are over 70. They have 384 donors that are over 60. They have 492 donors who are over 50. Now, my question is, what are they doing with this group of donors? Are they educating them? You know, so many organizations start marketing programs, they do it 2 or 3 years and they quit because they saw no results. Well, there's two types of donors and really two types of wealth accumulators. There's the instrumental accumulator whose goal is to build wealth to make a difference in people's lives. And maybe they didn't intend to be rich, but they became rich because they were pursuing a dream. Maybe they started a business in a garage, whatever it might be. And then you have the terminal wealth accumulator, and their goal is to take care of themselves, a bigger house, a fancier car, greater vacations. And then when you really look at who are these individuals that are making gifts, we know people tend to make their largest gift when they're at what age? 80. But it takes years of education before that. So if we go to the next slide. So pure observations and recommendations and what we've seen over the years. A good strategic plan is going to look at your strengths. You're going to look at your weaknesses. What are you going to do after you've reached out to the low-hanging fruit? That's easy. Going after low-hanging fruit is easy. It's quick. And the next thing you know, you've gone through your donor list and you don't know anyone else because we're not out making enough visits. What is your donor pipeline? Another tremendous indicator is what is your donor retention rate? So then you segment, once you have this information, you start segmenting your donor list and you do it by age, areas of emphasis, areas of relationship with the not-for-profit, and then you assign them to the appropriate individuals in their portfolio. And there needs to be a plan of engagement for every single donor. I know that sounds extreme, but the most successful shops, they really take time to plan for each donor and each step they're going to take. So the next slide, if you would. So here's something to think about. What is your staff's donor capacity? How many donors do you have at the annual and major gift level? Now, you know this old tripod we used to have where you begin with annual gifts, major gifts, and then planned gifts? I really think that strategy is outdated. We need to be looking for people with a strategic approach. And the second question, do you have enough staff to steward your donors at a proactive level? That applies not just to gift planning, that applies to major gifts and annual gifts as well. So to really pause and ask, do we have the right number of staff? And are they in the right position? And even maybe more importantly, do we have enough support staff? So the next slide, if you would. I think this is Nathan's.
Yeah, exactly. And that gets me to, I wanted to touch on and a couple of things you said in the last couple of slides here, Eddie. When you're looking at the observations and recommendations, the strengths and weaknesses is so critical. And one thing, even just the conversation I had with the fundraisers out here earlier today, is being candid with yourself, being honest with yourself, organizationally, individually, on where you're at. There is no perfect program, no perfect fundraising program right now. Even the biggest organizations that we hear about in the news and are seeing these great gifts, they have things to work on. And again, as I go back to even the national standards and that GPS, the growing pipeline for focus and sustain, there are opportunities at every organization to build. And one thing, as a call to action, as a charge to those of you on the call today, at the end of today, we'll talk about the assessments that CGP has built out. That is one aspect of how do you, provide not only yourself, your staff, your leadership with some honest candor on where the program's evolving to, because it can be very tactical, it can be very reactive. And we need to be really much more thoughtful about building, as even Eddie mentioned, that donor pipeline and where we spend our time and how we, the portfolio discussion, Eddie, could be a whole different talk. Could be an entire presentation as far as the debates nationally on that. But as you're looking at some of the staffing and the capacity that Eddie was just referencing, this looks different at every organization. It is critical, though, that we're honest on what's realistic, especially coming out of the last 2 years. Constantly being asked to do more with less. One of the things I really love, and you kind of talked to a little bit there, the silos, or, kind of breaking some of those silos, Eddie. Yes, we in the fundraising world and nonprofit, we have kind of built these silos, not based on the donor experience or not based on the donor journey, but based on infrastructure. We built our annual giving, we built our events, we built our major plan and so forth. And more organizations, and, whether it's marketing, whether that's staffing, all the things, we need to be more holistic in the way we look at it. One of the webinars I still love, and I ran into Patience Bedreau at the national conference last week in Reno. I think we still have it archived on the Stelter website, is around plannual giving, where she and Ray Watts really looked at what University of Redlands was doing at that time. And instead of, some of the portfolio wrangling that we have and the butting of the heads between major and plan, is really talking about from the donor perspective.
Yes.
This is the donor. You are there almost from birth to grave. I mean, you are spending your time with those folks, because donors don't think of their giving in buckets. They think about, I'm connected to this organization. I see the extension of my personal values in the mission and the work this organization is doing. I want to help. That may be now, maybe later. And so that's really critical when we look at this, the importance of qualified staff. Just last week in Reno, Eddie and I and others were part of a Leadership Institute roundtable talking about staff retention, staff recruitment. There is a need to really continue to, evolve our programs based on what the work is today. And for, the 300 or so of you on the call today, you may be in different areas. Because of the structure of your program, you may be juggling 3 or 4 things. You may be more internal face versus external face. And so next slide kind of shows, and this is kind of a death by PowerPoint, but this is really an inventory of different functions we see in the plan giving space. And so not for reading or consumption today, but again, as we share the PDF and the recording later, right now, in the end of 2022, coming out of a crazy last couple of years where everybody is reevaluating everything, the Great Resignation, the personal inventory on what charities I support, everything, the role that you had or your folks on your team had 2 years ago, if you're may look different now. The job descriptions need to evolve. It needs to be not dissimilar to gift acceptance policies and things like that, something that is under constant review and focus. And so, as we look through and this discussion we had at the Leadership Institute, Andy Hibble with the Hibble Foundation and the Plan Giving Initiative spoke to, his other hat that he wears with founder of higheredjobs.com, spoke to a look at plan giving job descriptions that were out there on that website. And, what are some similarities? What are some things? And it falls through all these different areas. And, part of this is being mindful. Part of this is communicating internally on, what's needed today versus what's needed tomorrow and how you grow towards that. And honestly, part of it's being flexible too. I know, in the nonprofit world, we all live, flexibility sometimes may be tough, but we need to be flexible now more than ever in regards to how we're building these roles. And again, Jen, you can kind of go to the next slide. This just follows up on a couple of those other areas of focus that we tend to see as it relates to these roles. So as you're building for capacity, as you're building for really reality on what you can or can't take on from an organizational or individual standpoint, being mindful of that and knowing the different roles and responsibilities you have in plan giving, and what would that look like if you were staffed appropriately and effectively. And so I'll hand it over to Eddie to kind of talk a little bit about, some of that gap that may be happening because of some of our focus or lack of focus, I guess, on staffing.
Well, thanks, Nathan. I think what keeps me up at night, I'm sure that's a question you ask yourself every now and then. What keeps me up at night is the potential dollars that could go to really worthwhile charities that's left on the table. We're leaving so much money out there that could really benefit those individuals we serve through our mission. So I would ask 3 really important questions. What is your unrealized potential? How much money could you raise? And I would suggest to you that you cannot dream big enough dreams. You cannot dream big enough dreams if you pursue your career and pursue the mission of your organization and set the highest standards in donor relationships. You cannot dream big enough dreams for that. It's staggering what we could do if we were more strategic in our approach and held ourselves more accountable? Are your fundraisers so overloaded that they don't have time to visit lower tier donors and only visit your very best donors? Have you ever gotten a call from an attorney who says Mrs. Smith has died and she's left you $100,000, and everybody starts looking around at each other going, who is Mrs. Smith? And you go back and look at the donor records and she gave you 25 or maybe 50 or maybe even $500 a year, but her gifts were so small no one ever visited her. How many of those Mrs. Smiths do we have on your donor portfolio? They're there. There's a lot of money we're leaving on the table. And do you have donors who would give more if they had a deeper relationship with your organization? Well, we all know the answer to that. So if we keep doing the same thing the same way and expecting dramatic results, we know the answer to that one, don't we? So let's go to the next slide. This is about conversations. Now, I wish we had, and we have a strategy to do this to help you. I wish we had all your CEOs and CFOs on this webinar today. That's where this needs to start. One of the things we have talked about within the national board is what can we do to help organizations and really talented fundraisers convince their leadership that the investment in philanthropy and specifically the investment in gift planning is worthwhile. We need to start internally with our conversations. That's one of the things I love about the standards, Nathan. You all included that. It needs to start internally. And then what are we doing to build stronger relationships with our donors? Do you have special events? Once the special event is over, do you all get back together in about a month and pat each other on the back for how much money was raised? Or do you have a strategy over the next 8 months to engage those new individuals who are introduced to that new special event? And then data. What type of data do we need to find our best prospects and donors? And again, what is more important, a donor's propensity to give or a donor's ability to give financially? I would propose to you that it's more important to find those individuals who love your organization and love the mission. Next slide, if you would. More important questions to consider. Here are 5. Are there gifts being left on the table? I want you to think about that. Number 2, what would be different if you had a larger staff who spent more of their time in conversations with donors? We are understaffed in philanthropy, and a terrible trend is decreasing the size of staff. That doesn't make business sense. Number 3, what if we focus more on increasing net income over ROI? I wish we could throw the idea of ROI out the window. As a business owner, I want to know what I need to do to increase my net. How do I increase my net? As nonprofits, we'd be better off if we would focus on that. Number 4, the FT in conversation with donors is the key to increasing dollars raised, either future gifts or current gifts. The more time, by the way, we define FTE as full-time equivalent with donors. That's what I look at. If I'm trying to find out if an organization is really hitting on all cylinders, I'm looking at how much time are officers spending with donors. And number 5, ask yourself, why don't we make the needed changes? I would suspect the problem is not you. I suspect the problem is above you. Next slide.
Well, Eddie, actually, real quick, can we go back to that one slide? I wanted to, literally that point 2 there about the difference you have with larger staff. I mean, there's a conversation we had with the group here and the fundraisers this morning. If we were able to staff accordingly, we would be able to build relationships, steward relationships, to the end of time. We know that's not realistic. But how do we make sure, we're staffing for the appropriate amount of growth, for the appropriate impact we want to have based on what we're trying to accomplish? Just had an organization reach out earlier this week, and in typical one of those things, hey, our board wants to invest in planned giving. We received, unbeknownst to us, a $4 million bequest last year. Terrific, great. They have a compelling event coming 6 years down the road in 2028. We're not going to just try to throw tactics at it. The conversation was, all right, let's slow down to speed up.
Yep, there you go.
How are you set up for success? Not only from how you're, looking at what your organization looks like now, what does that donor journey and experience look like now? But, as she mentioned, we were looking at adding staff. Okay, what does that staff look like? What are their roles and responsibilities? How do you, with a large file, make the most? So again, I just wanted to, that is so timely for a lot of organizations, especially coming out the last couple of years, on where do we spend our time? Where do we have the most impact? based on how we're now working and what our organizations and what we expect of ourselves.
Well, let me give you an example of that, Nate. That's a great question. We go back to that slide. Sorry, Jen. Number 2. We just did an analysis back several months ago now. I don't know how long it's been. There were 22,000 donors that gave to that organization that year. They had 5 major gift officers. So 5 major gift officers. And of the 22,000, they made 600, and I think I'm right, I could be off 10 or 15, but they made about 600 visits, those 5 gift officers. So out of 22,000 donors, they made 600 plus visits to 200 donors. So what that means, as I go back and analyze it, is that they really saw 200 donors 3 times each. So my question is, what are you doing for the other 21,800? And so it becomes a staffing issue. And so what you do is you do an analysis of portfolios. You actually find out how much time major gift officers, annual gift officers, or gift planning officers have to commit to spending time with donors. That's why we really believe in FTE. Our goal when we work with a not-for-profit is to get them to increase the number of visits they make a year. So as you go back and look at the standards though, Nathan, you all did a remarkable job on this. It was incredibly difficult to look at all different sizes of organizations. But when you go back and look at the standards, they really fit every type of organization and every size. It's pretty amazing. So compliments to you all and everybody else on that. Really appreciate it. Okay, next slide, Jen, if you would. So common mistakes that we see in strategic planning. Number 1, we won't spend the money on training, which does not make any sense to me. And so our if nothing else, we worked with peer organizations and training staff, but so many organizations, they'll send you to a conference, and no offense intended to anybody, but very often conferences, presenters are average shops. I'm not interested in what average shops do. I want to know what the very best do. So I'm going to be looking for the very best to come in and train my staff. Second, staff staging. So what we do is we put together pro formas where you add an officer, here are the expectations. When you reach this benchmark at net income, then you add another staff person. So staff staging is really important to future success. And support staff, what is needed to support those officers so they can stay out having those conversations. And then accountability. Now, a lot of us are fearful of accountability. But I would suggest if it's not punitive, I don't believe in a punitive accountability. I believe in instructive and supportive accountability. What can I do, Nathan, to help you get out and see more donors? What can I do to help you to have an increase in your closing rate? So that accountability becomes incredibly important. And next slide, Jen, if you would. And then common mistakes in strategic planning as we continue, no long-term investment. It just drives me crazy that our goals are often set to be achieved by December 31. Short-term thinking never leads to long-term success. And then not very often we overthink. We think there's a new wheel to be invented that will change everything. Or if we do this research, or if we do this, we're always looking for the thing that is unique and hidden from us. It's a mystery that if we ever find it, we'll be more successful. Don't overthink this. This is purely about relationships and how many donors you increase in relationships. Then the last, follow through, a lack of execution. You can have a tremendous strategic plan for fundraising and set it on your shelf and nothing changes. Follow through, execution. There has to be accountability. And the best accountability starts with your own personal accountability. To what standard are you holding yourself? And remember, there are people that our organizations serve that need us to excel today. There are people that need us to excel, even though the results may not come 10 or 15 years from now, because there's still going to be that need 10 or 15 years from now. So the next slide, I believe, is Nathan's.
Yeah, no, and Eddie, I think where you're headed, and again, there is so much focus on the here and now. Yeah, I call it the Amazon effect. It's, what have you done for me lately? I want my results tomorrow. I want my package same day. If you're truly building your program and your efforts, and whether it's planned, major, or just your fundraising program as a whole, it needs to be focused on long-term vision and strategy. And actually, I saw, and I know we're going to get some questions, and we wanted to kind of finish this up in a couple minutes to open it up for Q&A. But I see Robert put a question in there around providing this talk or a variation of this talk to CFO and senior leadership. Actually, that is exactly our next step with this. We know, and again, as we've spoken to the standards where support from the top is critical, we actually, Eddie and I are candid, and we have no pride of authorship. We put this forward to give you some ideas and some ways to think about your program, but the buck stops with them. And we are going to actually tweak and honestly I'm 100% open to candid feedback from those on the call too, on what are things we need to make sure we include. But in the coming weeks, and we'll share that at the end of the call, we are going to have a variation of this that we'd ask you to share to your C-suite. We'd ask you to share to those folks, because that's really where we need to make sure the buy-in is. I think a lot of us on the call here understand the importance of this. Maybe we don't always adhere to some of these best practices or build the strategy the way we need to, because there is a lot of pressure on the here and now. But that's one of our goals is, how do we help everybody continue to think differently? And so again, the vision and strategy is, if you're taking away anything from this, it's really critical to think longer term. It'd be great, if our donors gave to us just because they we wanted them to, or they need the money, but that's not why. It's because they're aligned with our mission. And the mission is about not necessarily just the work you're doing today, but the work that you're doing down the road. And as we've spoken about a couple things here, and part of what we built into the standards with making the case and being realistic, is there a written business case for why we even talk about plan giving? Is there a internal document that you're just candid and honest with yourself at this point in time? This is where we're at. This is why we're doing it. And do you use that? I think Eddie brings up a great point with any type of assessment or audit, or does it just sit on the shelf and we never look at it again? How is this a living, breathing tool that your organization is using as you move forward? So as you go to the next slide, Jen, as we kind of bring this down, I want to get to some of these questions. And again, this is very much something we want to bring to the C-suite. I would charge you again to be honest. There's some great things, and the reason Eddie and I wanted to talk to this today, accountability is critical, and Eddie's team at Give Clarity, and they put together this Go Connect tool that I think is terrific to help us adhere to best practices in all the areas of how we grow a program. But at the very least, we need to just, start with assess where you're at. Again, the national standards are focused, and we built assessments so you can just take a candid look into where you sit today, where that may need to, where your gaps are, where your strengths are. And including your teams, your entire, as Eddie mentioned, it's not just a plan giving thing, including your fundraising team, your leadership. So we're all on the same page in the role that this type of fundraising plays as we grow our missions and our organizations. And then don't put it on the shelf. This should be part of, if it's not monthly, at least quarterly, if not quarterly, at least twice a year. It needs to be a living, breathing thing to keep us accountable. Because we all know the fact it's almost 2023, we all know how quickly time flies. And so how do we make sure we're doing things with the limited time we have to the best standards and practices that are available? And Jen, if you want to go to the next slide, and then I know we want to open up for questions. I know there are a variety of things that will go into even further depth today with the time we had, really only 45 minutes because we want to allow some time to answer questions. There's some resources that Eddie and his team put together, I think are terrific to dig a little deeper into some of these. And so, along with, hopefully going to the standards website and taking that assessment, being able to access some of these are great tools to kind of build some of this smarter, more thoughtful infrastructure to your programs. Eddie, you want to say a couple words before we open up for questions?
Yeah, I would say there's two things. One is that you can't control when a donor gives or how much. What you can control are your activities. So rather than measuring how much money you raise, measure your activities. And then lastly, there's so much unrealized potential, Nathan. It shocks me when I'm working with donors in our planning through Thompson and Associates. And when I look at what they have given in the past and what they're currently giving or what they will give in the future, it can change. 4 or 5 donors can change the trajectory of your not-for-profit, and they're there, but you may not know them.
Yep. Yeah, and I know Jen will open this up to questions as we kind of go through those. Jen is our amazing webinar guru, and we'll kind of walk us through that. I did see one from Carlos earlier when we were talking about the functions of the job descriptions around function 6, which was really talking to prospect, research, and management, and asking if this was strictly an analytics thing. And it's not strictly an analytics. Analytics play a part. And again, we're getting, depending on your organization, your data, and your ability to kind of connect dots from a donor's propensity to support you in this way is part of that. But it's really, again, around building realistic portfolios, around identifying the right people. And, you know, given where they're at in their journey, you know, how do we talk to them in the right way? So yeah, analytics does play a part of that job function, but it's not the sole part of that.
I would add to that, Nathan, the best research is what you do. And that when you sit down and have those conversations and talk about the pictures on the wall or the books they're reading or what gives you purpose. In fact, if it would help, I've got 2 pages of questions that I use with donors. I just now thought of this. We should have offered it, but I'm happy to share that if we can figure out a way to do that. Questions I use to pull it out from donors. You know, why are you philanthropic? Those type of questions. What do you think about gifting to your family? Can I add one other statistic? That 36% of baby boomers do not anticipate leaving their full estate, or in fact, any of their estate to heirs. 1 in 3 are not planning to leave money to their heirs. There's tremendous opportunity that we'll not realize if we don't become active.
So we do have people interested in the questions that you just mentioned, Eddie. So
Okay.
yeah, we can put that on the website. We'll have the recording and a PDF of the slides for you. And we'll also have a link to download those questions.
Okay.
So Mary's wondering, Eddie, if you can talk a little bit more about the difference between focusing on ROI versus focusing on net income.
Yeah, here's a good example. You know, you'll have a CEO who looks at the ROI for fundraising. And that is limiting to me. I would not run my business, Nathan, you wouldn't run your business where it was just purely ROI. It's how do we grow our net? That's what business owners think. And I think there's several ways to approach this. One is to sit down at the end of the year and show them what philanthropy has brought to the bottom line. Of their $2 million net, how much of that came from philanthropy? And when you look at going forward, I think it's getting them to see that if I were to give you, or if you were to give me $5 and I'd give you 20, how often would you do that is a question. But if you were to give me $40 and I'd give you $100, which of those two would you pick? The $5 or the $40? Well, the return on investment is better for the $5 for $20, but the net is much better for the $40 for $100. It's that concept of getting them to see beyond just purely numbers to achieve a goal. How do we raise the goal? How do we increase the net? I hope that helps. If not, I'd be happy to talk sometime on the phone with you.
We have just a lot of questions in different formats, but the real question of all of them is, this all sounds amazing, and we understand this is important. How do we get our CEO, how do we get our C-suite to act on it? How do we get them to know that it's important? Any suggestions on that?
Nathan, you want to go first? Do you want me to?
Yeah, I mean, I'll state the obvious for us. I mean, again, as I mentioned, when we started putting our heads together and thinking through how do we continue to provide, some thoughts around what we've seen from best practices to us on the front lines. That's why we put this talk together. But we are putting together a variation of this for the C-suite. So we will definitely be sending this out to the powers that be. But another thing we'd like to ask is that you share it, because we know it's going to take quite a few different conversations in a couple different ways for some of this to resonate. I mean, I've had, and I know Eddie's had conversations with CFOs and others that just don't get it. Why aren't these gifts coming in the door, and why can't I apply this to operating today, and all these types of misnomers. So we actually have one set up for noon Friday. I want to say it's November 18th. I'm losing track of days, but November 18th, that is going to be solely focused to the leadership. And so, again, both what we shared today, but looking for feedback and candor from those of you on the call. Are there other things you're seeing that are hurdles without trying to be everything to everybody in this talk. But how else can we help you make the case? And Eddie, I'll kind of hand it to you as far as some other ways that you can help.
I would ask the question, would we be more successful if we had a strategic plan? And would we be more successful if we had higher accountability? And I guarantee if you're running an organization of any size and any level of success, they've done that at an institutional level. What we haven't done is do a strategic plan for the fundraising shop. And, as a business person, if I can invest $1 and get $4 or $5 or $6 back, I want to know how to increase that. And so I think at some point in time, you got to sit down and have a really serious conversation and talk about, I want to help grow the dollars we raise. And would you be open to listening to my suggestions? But let us pitch for you too. Let Nathan and I get your CEOs and CFOs on this webinar. That's probably going to be what, 30, what do we plan? 30 minutes, Nathan, something like that.
Yep.
We're not going to take all day, but we're going to go to bat for you. And I would encourage you to get as many of your leadership on, and even maybe some board members, chair of your board or whatever. But let us help you. We know this is one of the biggest obstacles you face, the right funding. And we'll do everything we can to help you with that.
Yeah, so as Nathan mentioned, we have it scheduled right now for noon on November 18th, and I'll be sending invites out to you. And also we have quite a few, C-suite in our database. So, but
Right.
we ask that you also pass them along. And someone asked for the link to the standards, and Nathan has put that in the chat. You guys should be able to open up your chat and see that link to the CGP standards. Question, in your experience, what percentage of fundraising shops assess their fundraisers by the number of visits or the number of actions rather than the dollars that they've raised?
You want to answer, Nathan, or you want me?
Go ahead. I know this is your wheelhouse, Eddie.
Yeah. I'm embarrassed to tell you it's probably less than 10%. And I would suggest it's not because of DODs, directors of development, that are forcing that. I think it tends to be the leadership above them. How much are you raising? We have a terrible blight where CEOs and CFOs are coming to not-for-profits shops and saying, you need to go raise this amount of money next year, or this capital campaign needs to be this size, without ever doing any kind of analysis. So I would suggest that it's a very small percent, and they may all be on this call, but I'm telling you, it is incredibly rare for that to take place appropriately. We need to be fair. That's what I would suggest in our analysis.
Another question from Sherry. Once you have a 3 to 5 year strategic plan in place, how often should you and the team review it to determine where it stands and whether or not you need to make adjustments?
One of the things we do when we put together a strategic plan, we put together off a staff staging plan where you set goals for each gift officer, realistic goals, not unrealistic goals, which includes the number of donors, the number of visits, and then you have a net benchmark over here. And so we suggest that the evaluation is ongoing, but at least a really deep dive, at least annually, and I would recommend the best months to do that are October and November. The next best months would be January, February, where you really pause and look, where are you on those benchmarks? And the other thing we suggest is that you schedule when you're going to hire new staff, when you're going to hire new support staff, what year over the next 5 years. But again, everything is based upon reaching certain benchmarks. That's where this is no longer a science, it becomes an art. But every year you need to take a really deep dive and make sure that you're on target. And if not, you need to adjust.
We have Dawn is asking, is there a CGP standard that is around metrics, reporting, and forecasting for plan giving?
Yeah, so CGP, again, the national standards really did. It's in 2016 started off as a metrics initiative, and that's where we realized very quickly that a lot of us, and almost all of us, we have different nomenclature we use in our shops. We have different ways we use our CRMs and how we talk about things and reporting. And it was really hard with all these great organizations willing to volunteer to help us put the metrics initiative together to find a place to start. And so that's when we did the slow down to speed up and backed up and said, this is really bigger. This is a standards aspect, and we need to get some of these foundational things. We are working hand in hand with our CRM providers. We are very much in phase 2 of the national standards. Part of that is around metrics, around the nomenclature and the words, the leading and lagging indicators, and how do we have, while there are lots of different shapes and sizes, as Eddie alluded to, of shops, and where Plan Giving plays a role, what's realistic for you to be tracking based on where you're at in your program. So that is very much part of phase 2. Also part of that is working with Blackbaud, working with Salesforce, working with these providers to better standardize. We know it's not going to be 100% and will take time, but better standardize the way that we are tracking, better standardize how we're running reports and can articulate. I know a colleague of mine who used to be at a big research university in the Northeast had created 6 different types of dashboards out of her Blackbaud NXT for the 6 different audiences she had, because it wasn't native and it wasn't intuitive. And so how do we work with them? And they're very, very willing to look at this. Because, for annual giving, it's very easy for us to use our tools in our CRM. For plan giving, it's not as much. And so how do we build that? And then the other sides of kind of where we're at in phase 2 is, again, on how do we build this educationally into all of our curriculum and our programming? And how do we make sure in a variety of areas that we're getting, this message, not only to those of us that are practicing it daily, but to the leadership and why it's important.
Nathan, I would add the most important metric used by the most successful shops is number of visits, number of donors. The money comes, if you can't control when a donor gives or when they're going to pass away and when that gift matures. So let's focus on what really matters, which is our activities. That's what matters.
So we are just about out of time. I want to just pose one quick question. I promised her I would. Carly said she was surprised, Eddie, when you made the comment that most gifts, the largest gifts, are made when people are 80 years old. She wanted to make sure she heard that right.
Yeah, and I tell you who came up with that was Russell James. That's one of his statistics. And it makes sense. If I don't know how much time we have. Can I take 2 minutes or a minute?
We only have a minute left.
Okay, real fast. The reason why is because they've answered 3 important questions at 80 when they can't answer at 65. Do I have enough to live on the rest of my life? What else should I do for my heirs? And would I rather money go to the IRS or charity? They don't know people. I mean, I'm 69. I can't tell you if I have enough to live on the rest of my life. I don't know what's going to happen. In 15 more years, I should know.
Great. Thanks, Eddie. And then just an overall question from about 5 different people. Do you have any sample strategic plans that you could share, or can you direct people to where they might find some?
Yeah, that's a question I'll have to ask the other people in our company. I'm not smart enough to give you the answer to that. But
Okay.
Should I get back to you, Jen, or
Yeah.
Nathan?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Get back to me. And if you have either some resources to share or direct people to certain websites, we can also put that on our landing page when you get your recording.
We would need to make sure that we don't give confidential information. That's going to be my hesitation.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. So we are out of time. I did want to say we had a couple of questions left. So if we didn't get to your question, or if you thought of another question, you can reach out to Eddie, myself, Nathan. Our emails are on the screen. And if you'd like to learn more about Stelter, you can visit us at stelter.com. And again, the webinar resources that we'll have for you, we'll have the recording, we'll have a PDF of the handouts. Eddie's going to give us the questions he asked donors, and then possibly some strategic plan examples for you. So those are going to be ready on our website. I will send you a personal email when they are ready for you to access, and it should be by the end of the week for sure. So thanks, everyone. Thank you, Eddie, and thank you, Nathan, for spending last hour. We had, I think, close to 300 people with us. So great way to spend the last hour.
Jen, thank you. And Nathan, thank you for letting me be a part of this. And let's go change the world by being excellent.
I love it. Thank you, everybody.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.
Bye.